Welcome to a new podcast from the New Silk Road series. This time, Professor Richard Griffiths explains why the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative is not a Marshall Plan, and why the Chinese are so insisted to avoid this comparison. If you're looking for more information on the Belt and Road Initiative, take a look at our social media. You can join our discussion group for an informative debate or check out our Twitter. And don't forget to take a look at our website where we offer more podcasts, books, and an online library dedicated to the New Silk Road.
China's Belt and Road Initiative is not a Marshall Plan. Everyone in China will tell you that. If you happen to link the BRI with the Marshall Plan, the conference, you will be rebuked by Chinese speakers if they're there. Ministers make speeches that make quite explicit that the Belt and Road is not a Marshall Plan. And they are right. It is not a Marshall Plan. Now, why are the Chinese so insistent that there's no link between the two? Well, they explain the Belt and Road Initiative by pointing out that it's global in conception, and it's open to all nations of the world, regardless of their internal domestic policies. It doesn't interfere with domestic policies at all. And the object of the exercise is to build a world of a shared common destiny, if you like, to create a new world order which is free and open for everyone. And the way to do it by using connectivity and infrastructure is to create win-win situations so that both sides actually benefit from intensifying relationships. All right, so that's their story. So what's the problem then with the Marshall Plan? Well, they'll explain it very simply. The Marshall Plan is certainly not global. It's restricted to Europe. It's called the European Recovery Programme, and there's no doubt about that. But more to the point, it's also closed to the communist countries in Eastern Europe. Perhaps not explicitly, but by establishing conditions that no centrally planned authority under Soviet influence could possibly accept. The object is not, therefore, to create a common world destiny. It is, in fact, an economic weapon in the growing Cold War that's beginning to simmer from 1947-48 onwards, and that's going to last the next 2 or 3 decades. And, of course, the object is not to create win-win situations, because if you look at it through Marxist analysis, the idea is to establish a sort of quasi-neo-imperialism by the Americans over that part of the world that they happen to control. So if you put it in those terms, it's certainly not a Marshall Plan. But in fact, the reasoning goes deeper. So let's go a little bit further and have a look at the Belt and Road Initiative and compare it then with its counterpart, the Marshall Plan, or its non-counterpart, the Marshall Plan. So China's aim with the Belt and Road is to relieve an infrastructural gap, the gap between the needs of poorer countries for roads and pipelines and internet connectivity, shipping, ports, etc., and the actual ability to fund it themselves. And the object of the exercise by doing this is to increase trade and prosperity of the countries engaged in the entire program. How do they do it? Well, mostly by issuing what is called sovereign loans. The Chinese government, development banks, lend to other governments at favorable rates and favorable repayment schemes and schedules. And the size of the aid that they get given depends on the memoranda of understanding and the agreements made between governments together. That emphasis of together is quite important. They both make the decision. It's not imposed by China. Well, all right, does this differ so much from the Marshall Plan? Well, actually it does. You see, the object of the Marshall Plan is not to rebuild Europe. So everybody says, but it's not building the factories or the railways or anything else. It's actually trying to close a dollar shortage that emerges in Europe after the war. Now, part of the reason for that dollar shortage is that Europe hasn't got the exports in order to earn foreign currency, But part of it is also because it's having now to turn onto world markets goods that they used previously to get from Eastern Europe, which is close to them. So instead of paying it in soft currency, they have to pay it in hard currency. And if to compound all of that, there's a vast increase in the price of raw materials and food compared with manufactured goods, and that accentuates the position for Europe. So the target of the Marshall Plan is to relieve the dollar shortage. And so the objective is not particularly to increase European prosperity. It's never written in those terms. It is that Europe will establish balance of payments equilibrium by the end of the scheme. And that scheme initially is 4 years. So by 1952, everything is supposed to be in balance between Europe and the United States. How do they do it? Well, not by giving Europe dollars, they give Europe goods. Almost the same thing, but if you get tobacco and cotton and raw materials from America, you don't have to spend dollars on it. You can save whatever dollars and foreign currency you have for buying someone else. And the size of the aid, well, that's decided among the European countries together, but not based on what they want, what they demand, but based on the estimate of their balance of payments positions. Countries with a bad and desperate balance of payments situation gained more than poorer countries that had more balance of payments equilibrium. Well, let's probe a little deeper. Um, One of the things that's moaned about by the West when they look at China's Belt and Road is it's often conditional. The aid that is given is more often than not tied to the use of Chinese firms to actually implement the projects. Well, it gets the projects built, but it means the impact on the local economy tends to get limited more so than if you left it open for local firms to compete for the contracts. The funding comes from the state budget, from development banks, and from foreign direct investment. In theory, all of these things contribute to the Belt and Road, so private enterprise can actually label itself as part of the Belt and Road. So it's quite open to funding from whatever source is there. How long is it supposed to last? Well, we don't actually know yet. There's no limit attached to it, so it could go on for at least a decade or even longer. But note it's tied government to government. It's a series of bilateral agreements. There's not much multilateral or regional conception in the project. Now let's turn around and have a look what this means then for Marshall Plan. Well, the Marshall Plan's also conditional. I mean, as far as the goods were concerned, you got them from the United States. And okay, occasionally the US would buy outside itself. But the other thing was that all the goods had to be carried in American ships. And this sort of retards the development of the European merchant fleet, most of which is lying at the bottom of the Atlantic. The funding comes entirely from the American state, the federal government, and no other sources are involved. There's no talk about foreign direct investment supplementing the scheme. And to be honest, there wasn't much available after the Second World War. And European governments and European economies had very bad experience with American investment, which had been withdrawn in the 1920s and helped precipitate the Great Depression. So not only is there no foreign investment allowed, but America blocks off any other foreign scheme, no other bilateral scheme, no other scheme set up by the IMF, by the United Nations, the World Bank. No other scheme is allowed to go. They want to do all things to actually avoid a competition for funds. The intended duration of the project is 4 years, but even before it finished, the Korean War broke out and the tail end of the Marshall Plan was deflected. The funds were deflected into defense expenditure and the rearmament of Europe. But one interesting thing is that there were regional initiatives because not only did the Western European countries get together to decide on the allocation of the money, but they also adopted schemes to promote trade and payments among themselves. a soft currency scheme called the European Payments Union, the reduction of trade barriers among themselves, and in both cases, discriminating against the United States. So, in some ways, there are rather positive lessons in the Marshall Plan that could quite easily be carried over into the Belt and Road Authority, or Belt and Road Initiative. Now, we're coming to a number of slides which I hope you're going to enjoy, because a lot of people say, oh, the Belt and Road is just branding, it's just talk. It's just not true. But there is a lot of branding, there is a lot of soft power projection that accompanies the Belt and Road Initiative. Look at the emblem, it's always the same, and almost every conference that you go to in China has that blue in the background. And often it's called the Belt and Road Conference on Chemicals, the Belt and Road Conference on the Press, the Cooperation Conference on, you name it, it'll be happening. So the message and the color and everything is pushed out across a whole horizon, a whole span of activities. And then look there carefully, there's the results of a poster competition. This one is among children and children in Pakistan. And what you see there, the second then from the left, is the winning entry. It's also quite media savvy. I mean, we use the YouTube, so we're better to promote a nice Belt and Road song than to have a nice YouTube film. I put the link to the film down on the slide, but let's catch a little bit of the tune.
The belt connects the land, the road moves on the sea. The promise that they hold is joint prosperity. We're breaking barriers, we're making history. The world we're dreaming of starts with you and me.
And of course, if you're using YouTube, then you might as well put on films for adults, which of course will portray all of the developments in a favorable light. Well, 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 I mean, Americans would never do that with its altruistic self, would it? You are absolutely kidding. If you start on the left, you can see the emblem, the Marshall Plan badge that was affixed to all the goods coming to Europe under the Marshall Plan. Everything was labeled with exactly the same stamp, with exactly the same message. And as for a poster competition, well, why not? What you're looking at as the second from the left is the winning entry of a poster competition, this time actually for adults. And it was a Dutch artist that won it. And of course, we'd never target children, would we? Well, yes, of course we would. You get the child, they spread the message to the parent. What you see, the third one along, is a rather nice cartoon book explaining how nice and generous and helpful the American initiative is and was. And of course, you have films. This one, Village Without Words, has no words. It has very, very stirring music. And let's listen to a little of it. Here's a clip. Now, the film is produced in Italy and was distributed throughout Europe, and there are many others. But interestingly, in order to allow the villagers in Italy to actually see a film when very often they had no electricity, there's a special train that went round with a projection team to make sure that everyone in Italy was able to catch the message. They say in France, plus ça change, plus la même chose. The more things change, the more they stay the same. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this podcast. The music introducing it and leading it out was composed by Janet Zado, leader of the Florence Youth Orchestra. On the slide that follows, you'll be able to see the details on how to get in touch with us and where our other internet presence is. And I hope to meet you again online very soon. Goodbye.